I heard you mention in the past about you like to preemptively place deloads in your trainees. And, a lot of people, they will kind of wait until they're starting to feel run down, or if they're still progressing well, they'll just keep going. So why is it that you do it preemptively, and how do you decide if you want to do it every 3 weeks or 6 weeks, if it's going to be before they're really getting symptoms anyway?
Mm-hmm. The big thing is you just want to be proactive. You don't want to wait until you feel like you need to deload, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, first of all, you have to kind of look at what is it that deloads do? What's the purpose of deloads, right? People don't realize that training generates a certain amount of fatigue, right? And it's not the kind of fatigue that we feel that's inherent in all training, where you're out of breath, your muscles are sore, they're tired, that inherent type of process. It's more the fatigue that kind of follows you around like a shadow that you don't even know is back there, right? And that fatigue that it keeps mounting with each week that you're training is going to limit your potential and, more importantly, your performance, right? So to make an analogy, I always say, okay, let's look at a sprinter. A sprinter knows that he can run a 40-yard dash, maybe in 4.5 seconds, right? But there comes a certain point in time when the fatigue mounts so much it's like taking a shoe off, right? Mm-hmm. He's taking his shoe off because fatigue is so high. He's like, gosh darn it, I know I can run a 4.5 second 40-yard dash, but for whatever reason right now, it's just not happening, right? Mm-hmm. That fatigue is now masking his performance. And when you're a weightlifter and your performance is basically your sport and your training, you can't possibly keep wanting and progressing from training that is from subpar performance, right? So deloads basically are the effect of putting that shoe back on. Now you can actually perform to what it is you can do. I mean, you probably felt it. I know I can deadlift 450, 500 pounds, but on this particular day, I can't do it. And right. So if your potential is 400 pounds and your fatigue is 500, you're in a deficit. You're in 100
sure.
underneath zero, right? However, if you know you can deadlift 400 and your fatigue is zero, what's your potential? What's your expressible strength and performance? It's 400, right?
Sure.
So you want to stay proactive and keep that fatigue manageable and low so that you can actually perform to what it is that you know that you can do, right?
Yep.
Go ahead. Were you going to ask a question?
Well, I was going to say, and I think, and correct me if you have a different opinion, but I think it seems to be more important in powerlifting, or at least with those heavy lifts, because at least for me, anytime I would hit a deadlift PR, every time, the next time I would deadlift, I'd be weaker. It would just be like, I'd get up there, exactly. And especially if I was trying to show off to friends in college or something like that, I would literally do, a 6-rep max, and the next time I go in, and I'd fail with that same weight. It was just amazing to me how consistently that happened.
Yep, exactly. And yeah, performance sports, deloads are more important really than bodybuilding, right? Mm-hmm. However, it does play an important component into bodybuilding, because how many times have you in your training just all of a sudden, you were feeling good or whatever reason it happens to be, but you just happen to double up your volume, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe it is submaximal loads, maybe it always is lighter loads, but you start chasing the pump for a while, right? Mm-hmm. You can kind of see it almost in a way. It's like you do that consistently for maybe a 2, 3, 4 week period or a whole block. You just look a little bit bigger,
Yeah.
And then there's always that point of diminishing returns when you kind of reach that ceiling and it quits happening, right? Deloads kind of keep that effect kind of propagating in bodybuilding. You drop that volume off. Then when you start picking it back up again, your body kind of recognizes it, right? Mm-hmm. And then you kind of start getting the benefits from it again, and you just keep recycling that, kind of over and over and over again. So it does have its place. Now it's less recognizable from a performance standpoint, but you almost can't deny it when you see it from a visual kind of physique standpoint.
Yeah.
And that kind of brings to the next question: how often? How often should you deload? Well, the big important part is be proactive, right? Make sure that you're not at a point to where you can't perform, where you can't get that weight off the floor that you can do for 6, right? Mm-hmm. You want to deload before you get to that point. But you always kind of want to think of it almost in terms of time in a way, right? if you've trained for, intensely and hard with a lot of volume for a point of, say, 8 or 10 weeks, 1 week of deload is going to be a speed bump, right? It's not going to be a long enough period of time in comparison to the amount of time that you spent building all that fatigue, right? And so there's got to be kind of this ratio of, I always like to kind of use like 3 or 4 to 1, to where it's like, okay, if you do 3 weeks of training, 4 weeks of training, you need to do 1 week of deload, right? You do 8 weeks, you need 2 weeks of deload. You do 12, you need 3 weeks of deload. So your body can actually recognize, okay, you know what? This is a drop in volume, okay? I can now start dropping this fatigue that's been generating for so long. So hopefully that kind of answers that question as well.
Yeah, for sure. And when you're deloading, are you just kind of doing a standard? Well, I mean, I see actually 2 ways often prescribed. One is we cut the volume drastically, we keep the intensity pretty much the same. The other way, we keep volume reasonable, but we cut intensity to 50, 60%. Do you have a preferred method there?
Yeah. The former of the 2 that you mentioned is pretty much my favorite for most folks, right?
Okay.
I like to just say, okay, let's use the same loads and just cut the sets or / reps in half, okay? Now, people that are kind of more novice or even, maybe not newbies, but beginners, I'll say, you know what, if we're cutting the volume in half, I don't care what you do with the weight. Shoot, take it up if you want to. But if we're going from 3 sets of 5 to 1 set of 5, or if we're going from 3 sets of 8 to 3 sets of 4, heck, take the load up. I don't care, Now, on the flip side, when you're looking at somebody that's more intermediate or advanced, and they are a power lifter and they're training with very heavy loads that are pretty close, to maybe their 1 rep max, those folks can't do that. Those folks need a deload from intensity as much as they need a deload from volume. So a lot of times with those athletes, you need to do both. You need to not only drop off volume through a reduction in sets or reps or whatever, but then you also need to have a reduction in load as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it probably also depends, obviously, on the person to some degree. I know for me, if I'm training somebody and they need a deload due to something aching or an injury of some sort, I'm almost always going to be reducing the load, because in that case, I want them to recover. If somebody's telling me they got a nagging elbow issue or shoulder issue, I'm not going to have them lift the same weights that they were doing before most of the time, some exceptions, I guess. So.
Yeah. And a lot of times those deloads can be extended. You can run a transitional block of, blood flow restriction for like 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And maybe sometimes, like I've even just deloaded 1 lift or 1 body part, and then kind of used the extra time or the extra energy or, whatever the extra resources are to progress in another body part, So, there's a lot of different ways to deload. As long as volume comes down and you're proactive about it, that's the basic tenets of deloads, and that you'll benefit from it.
And do you find any value in, prior to the deload, almost doing a planned overreaching from a bodybuilding standpoint?
You can, for sure. Again, just be proactive, and if you do have an overreaching phase, how many of us, are saying, oh, wow, this is working really good. I want to stretch this out as long as possible until basically you're in a hole that you can't get out of, right? So yeah, I think if you are going to do an overreaching phase to where you're just pushing volume, maybe you're pushing volume and intensity up at the same time, right? Stick to your plan. Stick to your plan, and regardless of how you're feeling, make sure that you get that deload. And then again, look at the time period. Is 1 week going to be enough? If your overreaching phase was 6 weeks, you might want to stretch that deload out to where it's more like 10 days or 2 weeks, so that you can actually let that fatigue dissipate. Because I don't know about you, but I've done this to myself to where it's 2.5 weeks and I still can't lift that load that I know that I can lift. And it's just because the fatigue was so high. Yeah, you're going to take a good amount of time to actually get back out of that hole again.